What would you do if your fiancé printed your private photos and handed them to your parents during dinner? That's how it started for me, the night before our wedding, when I thought I could have one last wild night for closure. He didn't yell, didn't fight. He built a case, and I never saw it coming. I'm Seraphine Vale, 31, and I used to tell everyone I wasn't the kind of woman who settled too soon. Maybe that's why I said yes to Noah Carr when part of me still wanted to taste the life I was giving up. We were supposed to be married in 2 weeks. Flowers ordered, guest list finalized, deposits paid. Everyone said he was perfect for me. Stable job, kind eyes, dependable in that quiet, careful way that made other women jealous. But sometimes perfection feels like a trap. I told myself I just needed one wild night, one last reminder of who I was before I became somebody's wife. Noah worked late most nights leading up to the wedding. He said it was to cover time off for the honeymoon, but I could tell he liked being busy. It kept him calm, predictable. I wanted chaos. My friends joked that I was getting cold feet, and I laughed because it sounded better than saying I was restless. That night, they dragged me to a rooftop bar downtown, one of those places with dim lights and expensive drinks that make you feel younger just by ordering them. And that's where I saw him. Evan Cross, the ex who once made everything feel electric. He looked almost the same, shaggy hair, camera slung over his shoulder, that same lazy grin that used to undo me. He said he'd heard about the engagement online and wanted to raise a glass to the brave man who tamed me. I rolled my eyes and told him Noah wasn't trying to tame anyone, but he just smirked. "Then why do you sound like you're asking permission to breathe?" he said. I laughed too loudly, partly from the champagne and partly from the sting of truth in his voice. We took photos like old times, silly and close, him teasing that I hadn't changed at all. When he said, "You don't have to be a saint just because you're getting married," I didn't argue. I told myself it was harmless nostalgia, a way to say goodbye to who I used to be. But when I woke up in his hotel room the next morning, my phone full of blurred pictures I barely remembered posing for, it didn't feel harmless anymore. I drove home with the ring still on my finger, telling myself it was a mistake, a moment I could bury. Noah was in the kitchen, making coffee, humming softly. He smiled when he saw me, asked if I had fun with the girls. I said yes. He told me he was happy I got a night to relax. That word, relax, felt like a knife. I kissed him on the cheek and told him I was exhausted. He said, "You deserve a break before the big day." I smiled and went upstairs, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. Even now, I try to remember if there was a moment when I could have stopped it all. Maybe when Evan took out his camera. Maybe when I laughed instead of leaving. But I didn't. I told myself Noah didn't need to know because love was about forgiveness, not honesty. I believed that lie right up until the day I found out he'd already seen the photos, long before I ever confessed. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The night started like any other girls' night I'd planned before the wedding, though this one felt heavier, like it had a weight I couldn't explain. Clara had insisted we go to that rooftop bar downtown, the one with the city lights stretching endlessly, the kind of place where everything feels possible and rules don't matter. I wore the dress Noah had once said was too loud, the one I'd been saving for a special night, and I told myself it was just confidence, not recklessness. I told myself I was celebrating freedom, but really, I was celebrating selfishness. Evan was there when we arrived, leaning against the railing, looking exactly the way I remembered. I felt a thrill that shouldn't have been there, like some dangerous part of me had woken up. He greeted me like nothing had changed, and for a moment, I believed that part of my life, my old self, was still alive. We talked, we laughed, we reminisced about nights that felt like they belonged to us alone, when responsibility hadn't yet crept in. I kept glancing at my phone, half expecting a text from Noah checking in, but it never came. I told myself he didn't need to know. We took pictures on the rooftop, leaning into the wind, laughing at nothing in particular. I told myself they were just memories, just harmless snapshots before a new chapter. He held the camera in his hands, showing me angles I didn't recognize on my own face, making me feel younger, prettier, reckless. The thrill grew with every shot, and I told myself I deserved this thrill, that I was allowed one last night before my life became someone else's. Clara cheered us on from the corner, snapping her own photos, saying we looked like we belonged in a magazine. I laughed and posed, forgetting completely that I had someone waiting at home who believed he was my world. After a few hours, we moved inside. Evan suggested we continue the night somewhere quieter, and I didn't resist. I convinced myself it was just a drink, just a conversation, but my pulse quickened, like I was stepping off a cliff. Every laugh, every glance, every touch that lingered too long was justified in my mind. This was freedom. This was who I was before I became a fiancé. I was careful to call Noah's absence space, telling myself he was working late, that he would never know. I convinced myself it was harmless fun. When the hotel room door closed behind us, reality began to bend. I told myself I wouldn't cross any lines that mattered. I told myself it was a single, fleeting mistake in a life that would be otherwise perfect. I allowed myself to forget that every moment of enjoyment was a betrayal. I told myself Evan and I were just two people clinging to nostalgia, that our night wouldn't matter in the long run. But every photo, every laugh, every whispered joke was a seed of destruction. The next morning, I woke up alone in the room, the city lights spilling across the floor. My phone vibrated, messages from Evan, images I hadn't remembered taking. I tried to tell myself they didn't matter, that they were just digital ghosts. I left the hotel quickly, my dress wrinkled, my makeup smudged, my heart pounding. When I drove home, I rehearsed my explanation. I told myself that I would smile at Noah, tell him I had fun with the girls, that it was all innocent. I told myself he would believe me because he always did. Noah was in the kitchen when I arrived, making coffee, humming softly. He didn't ask why I was late. He didn't look suspicious. He just smiled at me and said I looked tired, that I deserved a night out before the wedding. I smiled back, my throat tight, my stomach churning. I kissed his cheek and told him I was exhausted. He nodded and went to check on the kids. Every step he took was precise, ordinary, safe. I hated that. I wanted chaos. I wanted confrontation. I wanted him to see what I had done, to yell, to react. But he didn't. All day, I moved through the house pretending to be normal. The kids ran around, oblivious, asking questions I couldn't answer honestly. I made breakfast, tidied up, answered emails, all while thinking about the photos on my phone, the memory of Evan's grin, the way my own reflection had looked in the hotel mirror. I told myself I was careful, that Noah wouldn't find out. I told myself I was clever, justified, above consequence. But in the quiet moments, when the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock were the only sounds, I felt the weight of what I had done. That evening, Clara called to check in. She asked if Noah had suspected anything. I laughed, said he was just tired from work. She warned me to be careful, to keep the story straight. I nodded, hiding the fear rising in my chest. Even as I tried to reassure her, a tiny voice whispered that the night hadn't been harmless, that the photos, the messages, the memory of Evan would eventually reach Noah. I pushed the thought away. I told myself I had control. I told myself it was just a wild night. I was wrong. Monday morning arrived with a quiet tension that felt heavier than the sun rising outside. Noah had left early for work, as usual, and the house was already humming with the sounds of the kids getting ready for school. Evan was a distant memory, or at least, that's what I tried to tell myself, though the photos from the night before kept flashing behind my eyes. I moved through the kitchen carefully, making breakfast, trying to appear as if nothing had changed, as if I were the responsible fiancé and not someone whose night of freedom had already started a chain reaction. When I dropped the kids off, Noah texted, "Don't forget the deposit for the caterer." I stared at it a moment too long, my fingers hovering over the screen before typing, "Got it." His routine, his calm, his attention to detail felt suffocating now. It should have comforted me, but instead it made me aware of how much I had violated the trust he'd placed in me. I told myself it didn't matter, that he didn't need to know, that it was all harmless nostalgia. At work, my attention drifted through every meeting, every email, every phone call. I imagined the worst. Noah discovering the photos, confronting me in front of my colleagues, shattering my carefully constructed image. I tried to focus on my marketing reports, on client emails, but every ping of my phone felt like a warning. I finally checked Evan's messages from last night. Can't stop thinking about it. I deleted them before reading the rest, convincing myself that ignoring him would erase the danger. That evening, when I returned home, Noah was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open. He looked up and asked how my day was. I said fine, forcing the word to sound casual. He nodded and then, without looking up, asked why my phone had been off all afternoon. I stammered, told him the battery died. He didn't press. He just returned to his screen, typing quietly. The ease with which he accepted my excuse terrified me more than anger would have. Dinner passed in a blur. I chopped vegetables for the kids, stirring my guilt into the sauce, while Noah asked questions about school, about the kids' homework, about mundane things that now felt like subtle tests. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He didn't need to. The calm weight of his presence was a reminder of what I had thrown away. Later that night, as the kids went to bed, Noah suggested we talk. I tried to steer the conversation toward mundane wedding details, hoping to distract him. He asked about the hotel bar and the girls' night. My throat went dry. I told him it was fine, that Clara had kept me company. He nodded, quiet, calm. "Just make sure you're honest with me," he said softly. His tone made my pulse spike. I laughed nervously and said I was always honest, even though I wasn't. After he went upstairs, I sat in the dim kitchen staring at my phone. Every notification felt dangerous, every buzz like a warning bell. I imagined him discovering the photos, printing them, showing them to my family, showing them to friends, shattering the image I had worked so hard to maintain. I told myself it was paranoia, that I had everything under control, but my hands shook and my chest tightened with the weight of possibilities I couldn't stop imagining. The following day, Clara called, worried. She reminded me to stay calm, to keep the story consistent. I promised I would, but even as I reassured her, I couldn't shake the unease. I checked Evan's messages again, and the boldness of his words made my stomach churn. I deleted them immediately. I told myself the past was gone, that what mattered was keeping Noah in the dark. That night, Noah came home earlier than usual. He didn't say much, just smiled faintly and asked if I wanted to watch a movie with the kids. I forced a smile and said yes. He watched me closely, calm, quiet, controlled. The kind of calm that feels like it's waiting for a mistake, for an admission. I tried to act natural, making popcorn, arranging the blankets, laughing at the kids' jokes. But I could feel his eyes on me, and the weight of them pressed harder than any accusation. Later, alone in the kitchen, I realized I couldn't keep pretending forever. Every detail from the night before, the photos, the laughter, Evan's smirk, loomed over me. And though I tried to convince myself it was harmless, the truth was clear. Noah had noticed. Something in his quiet had shifted, and I had no idea how far he was willing to go. All I knew was that the night I thought I could control had already begun controlling me. By midweek, the tension between us had become tangible. Noah's calm, orderly behavior made my every thought and movement feel exaggerated. like a spotlight exposing all my missteps. He didn't scold. He didn't accuse. He simply existed with a patience that unsettled me far more than any argument could. The kids were blissfully unaware, running around the apartment and asking me questions I didn't have the courage to answer honestly. I told myself it was just nerves, that my guilt was being dramatic, but even I could feel the cracks in my carefully constructed facade. Clara insisted we go out again on Friday night for a friend's birthday. I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to face the world, knowing what I had done. But the alternative, staying home with Noah watching my every move, felt suffocating. She promised me laughter, distraction, and a temporary reprieve from my conscience. I wore the red dress again, the one that had caused tension between Noah and me during the week, and told myself it was confidence, not recklessness. I told myself I was celebrating life before the wedding, reclaiming freedom before responsibility chained me. At the restaurant, friends laughed and cheered as I walked in. Someone asked if Noah had given me permission to go out, and I shrugged, claiming he was always supportive. I smiled, laughing along, feeling the thrill of the attention, feeling like the clever one who could navigate all social situations while hiding secrets. Clara whispered to me, urging me to relax, but her glance carried a caution I could feel in my chest. I laughed it off, pretending confidence instead of paranoia. Throughout dinner, our conversation inevitably turned to relationships. I made jokes at Noah's expense, teasing that he was predictable, that he had no idea how to keep things exciting. Friends laughed. I smiled, reveling in the humor while ignoring the gnawing fear that Noah's calm detachment at home was anything but ignorance. Every laugh felt like a small victory over the life I had momentarily rejected, but beneath it, a tension simmered that I refused to acknowledge. Later, Clara pulled me aside near the bar. "You're pushing it," she whispered, voice low. "Noah's going to notice. You can't keep juggling everything and expect him not to see." I waved her off, claiming I was fine, that I knew what I was doing. Inside, however, I felt a tight knot of panic. I didn't want to believe her. I didn't want to believe that my freedom could be so precarious. When I returned home, Noah was already sitting in the kitchen, the dim light casting shadows across his face. He didn't speak at first, just looked at me. His silence felt heavy, intentional. I asked if he had a long day, pretending concern where fear had taken root. He nodded once, and then said quietly, "We need to go over a few things for the wedding." The casual tone didn't match the weight in his eyes. I tried to smile, tried to act as if I didn't notice the slight edge in his voice. That night, as I lay in bed beside him, I could hear the steady rhythm of his breathing. It was soothing, yet it felt like a countdown, marking the time until my recklessness would catch up to me. I told myself I was still in control, that Noah wouldn't find out, that one last night couldn't undo years of planning and love. But the quiet of the apartment pressed against me, a reminder that the past was never truly buried, and that secrets had a way of surfacing when least expected. The following day, Noah remained calm, professional even, as he helped the kids get ready for school. I tried to focus on my own routine, keeping my mind busy with work and errands. Yet every glance from him felt loaded. Every question about plans or messages carried a subtle weight. I found myself over-explaining, inventing small excuses, desperately trying to fill the gaps I feared he had already noticed. That evening, I caught a glimpse of my own reflection in the hallway mirror, and for a moment, I didn't recognize her. The woman who had laughed at jokes about her fiancé, who had posed for photos she shouldn't have taken, who had justified a wild night as freedom. The reflection stared back at me, a warning I was too proud to heed. Noah came home earlier than usual, his presence calm, deliberate, precise. He asked casually about dinner and the kids' homework, but I felt each word like a test. I smiled, nodded, offered answers, all while my chest tightened with every step he took. The air between us was charged, unspoken accusations dangling like invisible wires. I realized then that the man who never raised his voice had already begun a quiet campaign. His calm was not ignorance, it was observation, and I had no idea how far he had already gone to prepare for the moment when truth and consequence would collide. As I collapsed on the couch after the kids went to bed, scrolling through my phone, I understood that the night I thought was mine to control had already begun to control me. Every notification, every vibration, every distant laugh from Evan's past lingered in my chest like a warning. Noah was waiting, patient and silent, and I was powerless to stop the reckoning I had invited into my life. By the start of the next week, the air in our apartment felt different, heavy, electric, almost watching me. Noah moved through the rooms as if nothing had changed, but every small detail, the precise alignment of papers on the counter, the exact placement of his keys, the way he glanced at me before looking away, told me that he had noticed more than I wanted to admit. I tried to act normal, pouring coffee for the kids, answering emails, folding laundry, but every movement felt under a microscope. The calm in his presence was sharper than any argument, and I began to realize that my charm, my lies, my manipulations weren't protecting me anymore. Clara called me that afternoon, sensing my anxiety. "You're letting it show," she said bluntly. "Noah's watching, and you know it." I laughed nervously, waving off her concern, telling her I was just tired, overwhelmed with the wedding planning. But inside, I couldn't stop thinking about the photos, about the night with Evan, about how easily I had deceived everyone, including myself. Clara didn't press, but her eyes told me she knew I was teetering on the edge of being found out. That evening, Noah came home early. He didn't greet me at the door with his usual warmth. Instead, he placed a stack of envelopes on the counter and said quietly, "I want to review some documents with you." I felt my stomach tighten. The word review had never sounded so final. I tried to smile and act as if I understood what he meant, but inside I was panicking. I asked what they were, and he said simply, "Just housekeeping, nothing urgent." His tone was calm, but his eyes carried a weight I couldn't place. As I sifted through the papers, I noticed folders labeled in neat handwriting. Joint accounts, wedding expenses, and one that made my heart stop. Hotel stay documentation. I froze, my fingers trembling as I opened it. Inside were receipts, metadata from photos, and even messages between Evan and me from the night I thought was mine alone. Every proof I had tried to hide, every small lie I had told myself to justify my actions, was now catalogued in neat, undeniable detail. I felt the floor drop beneath me. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself I could talk my way out of it, that I could convince Noah it was harmless, that Evan was exaggerating. I tried to convince myself that control was still mine, but Noah didn't speak, didn't intervene. He simply watched, calm and steady, letting me see that he understood every detail without a word. The silence was more punishing than any argument I had ever survived. Later, I found myself alone in the loft after the kids went to bed. I replayed the night with Evan over and over, trying to justify it, trying to erase the fear that was creeping into my chest. I told myself Noah didn't yet have the power to punish me, that I could still steer the narrative. But the folders on the counter, the meticulous organization, the quiet of the apartment, they all whispered the truth. He was already several steps ahead. The following morning, Noah left a note for me on the kitchen table. "Appointments moved. I'll handle the kids' drop-off today." It was simple, factual, but it carried authority. My parents called later, sensing a shift, asking how things were going. I lied smoothly, saying Noah was just busy with work, that everything was normal. But I could hear the hesitation in my mother's voice, the slight pause that told me she too felt the tension. At work, I tried to concentrate on my marketing campaigns, on client calls, on spreadsheet details, But my mind kept returning to the envelopes and folders. Every time my phone buzzed, I imagined it was Noah sending a new piece of evidence, proving some detail I had tried to obscure. I deleted Evan's texts and blocked his number, but it didn't erase the memory of the night or the impending consequences. When I returned home, Noah was in the living room, reviewing papers, calm as ever. I asked if he wanted help with dinner, and he shook his head, still absorbed in his work. I moved through the apartment like a ghost, aware of how visible I had become to him, aware that every small lie, every justification I whispered to myself, was unraveling. The man who had seemed predictable, who had seemed gentle and accommodating, had transformed into something I could not outwit or charm. By the end of the evening, I realized the reality I had ignored was unavoidable. Noah wasn't angry. He wasn't dramatic. He was preparing quietly, meticulously, legally. And I had no idea how far his plans had already gone, no idea how thoroughly he had mapped out the path from my reckless freedom to my inevitable confrontation. The night I thought I controlled had already begun to control me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. It happened one evening after dinner, quiet and deliberate. The kids were upstairs playing, oblivious, and I was pouring myself a glass of wine to calm the gnawing tension in my chest. Noah came in carrying a manila envelope, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. He didn't raise his voice, didn't glare, didn't accuse. He just placed the envelope in front of me and said, "We need to go through this." My stomach dropped, but I forced a smile. "What is it?" I asked, pretending curiosity rather than fear. He opened the folder carefully and began laying out the contents. Printed photos from that night with Evan, metadata from the images, and text message threads I hadn't realized he could access. Every single one of my justifications, every whisper I had told myself about freedom and nostalgia, stared back at me in cold, undeniable evidence. My hands shook as I tried to pick up a photo, my mind spinning, trying to argue before he even spoke. "I'm not here to yell," he said evenly. "I just need you to understand that I know everything." My chest tightened. I wanted to argue, to manipulate, to tell him it was just a mistake, that I was sorry, but the calm authority in his voice stopped me. He continued, pointing to messages and images, explaining how he verified every detail, how each timestamp lined up with the account I had given him. I tried to smile, tried to laugh it off, saying it was just harmless fun, but he didn't flinch. He simply watched me, the quietest, most deliberate form of judgment I had ever experienced. Then he handed me another envelope. My pulse jumped. Inside were documents, legal papers already drafted, prepared to protect assets, ensure custody, and secure the future. "I've already taken steps to protect what matters," he said softly. "I want to do this cleanly, legally and fairly, but I can't ignore what's happened." My hands went cold. I wanted to deny it, wanted to reach across the table and beg him to stop, but I couldn't. He had anticipated everything. I tried one last manipulation, claiming he had misinterpreted the photos, that Evan had overreacted, that it was all just a joke taken too far. He didn't flinch. "You've manipulated the narrative long enough," he said. "Now facts speak louder than excuses." His words were precise, measured, like the calm edge of a knife. I realized in that moment that any attempt to gaslight him or blame circumstances would fail completely. He went on to explain the custody arrangements for the kids, the reassignment of financial accounts, and the division of property. "This isn't punishment," he said quietly. "It's protection, and it's a consequence of choices you made." I wanted to cry, wanted to plead, wanted him to say he still loved me, that I could fix this. But he remained unreadable. The authority he carried was absolute, and my attempts to charm, justify, or evade were meaningless. I looked down at the evidence, my own words and images staring back, and felt a wave of helplessness. Even my parents, who had always defended me, could no longer argue against the truth in those documents. Noah had acted calmly, legally, and efficiently, leaving no room for manipulation, no cracks for excuses. Finally, he stood and said, "I'm done explaining. Everything you need to know is in these papers. The rest will be handled through proper channels." He left the room without another word, leaving me sitting at the table, staring at the folders and envelopes, the stark, undeniable proof of my betrayal and his measured, lawful revenge. For the first time, I understood that my recklessness had consequences I could neither charm nor lie my way out of. Noah hadn't yelled, hadn't fought, hadn't embarrassed me in public. He had done something far more devastating. He had quietly, efficiently, and irrevocably taken control of the situation, leaving me powerless to undo what I had started. The night I had thought was mine to enjoy had become a turning point, and I had no idea how to face the aftermath. 2 weeks later, everything that had been quiet erupted in a way I couldn't control. The legal documents Noah had filed came into effect: custody arrangements, asset protections, and a formal separation agreement. I tried to argue in my head, to convince myself that I could still spin it, but the law didn't bend for excuses or justifications. I sat in the loft alone, staring at the folders, knowing that my own recklessness had created an airtight, undeniable record against me. The kids were mostly with him now. He had arranged schedules so that their routine remained intact, calm, and predictable. Evan and Mira adjusted easily, happy in the stability that Noah provided, and I felt the isolation of my choices more acutely than ever. Every knock on the door, every text from my parents or friends reminded me that I had lost control of the narrative I thought I owned. Marla, my mother, tried to defend me, pleading for Noah to reconsider, but even her voice sounded weaker than usual. Elaine, Noah's mother, stood firm by her son's side, calm and resolute. She didn't need to raise her voice. The evidence did it for her. Clara threw a small birthday gathering to lift my spirits, but it felt hollow. Friends whispered, glanced, and some tried to ask if I was handling everything. I nodded, smiled, lied. They didn't know the depth of what had happened. I could see pity in their eyes, and I hated them for it, for reminding me that my mistakes were visible even to strangers. Around 8 that evening, a courier arrived at Clara's apartment, carrying a single envelope with my name on it. My hand shook as I signed for it, trying to maintain composure. Inside was the finalization of Noah's filings, complete custody of the children, secure ownership of the home, and legal protection of all assets. On top of it, a short note in Noah's calm, precise handwriting: "You wanted one night of freedom. I've given you a lifetime to remember it." My stomach dropped, my throat closed, and I realized that the man I had underestimated had dismantled everything I had taken for granted, without raising his voice, without confrontation, without drama. I left the party in a daze, clutching the envelope like evidence of my own failure. The city lights blurred as I drove, each red light feeling like a warning I had ignored. I passed Noah's house on instinct, the porch light glowing faintly. Inside, I saw him with the kids, calm and attentive. Evan was showing him a drawing while Mira laughed at something only a child could find funny. That laugh, the sound that used to belong to me, pierced my chest. I wanted to knock, to explain, to apologize, but the knowledge of the folders, the legal documents, and the note kept me from moving. I had no words, no excuses, no leverage. When I returned home, the apartment felt smaller than ever. Every object, every corner, reminded me of the life I had destroyed. I sat at the kitchen table, rereading Noah's note. "You wanted one night of freedom. I've given you a lifetime to remember it." It wasn't a threat. It was closure. The calm, lawful, precise way he had orchestrated the fallout left no space for bargaining or charm. My selfishness, my manipulation, my attempts to justify a single night of recklessness had all been catalogued, documented, and addressed with exacting precision. For the first time, I understood that consequences didn't need anger or yelling to be devastating. Noah's silence, his patience, and his adherence to the law had undone everything I had taken for granted. The life I had once controlled, the one filled with freedom, humor, and charm, was gone. All that remained was the quiet, undeniable truth of my own choices and the measured, irrevocable actions of the man I had thought I could deceive. I sat there long into the night, staring at the envelope and the papers it contained. My phone buzzed endlessly, messages from friends and family I could no longer respond to with confidence. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, and the quiet of an apartment I once shared as a home pressed down on me. Noah had acted without confrontation, without spectacle, and in that way he had won completely. The reckoning was final, and there was nothing left for me but to face the consequences of the night I thought would be harmless, but had changed everything forever. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching,